Yay.
All right, we're at five after. I imagine we're gonna have a whole slew of people come in for whatever the 11 o'clock thing was, and if they do come over, we always tend to pick up people. I don't know. And we have such a wonderful interview today. I'm really excited about this one. One of our very own, who is constantly thinking about how to make her space better, how to make it more inclusive, how to make it more inviting for others. And so I just love the opportunity, but I love back on Michelle here. So, guys, I'm super pumped. I've never physically met Michelle, albeit I'm like an hour away from her. So, dumb on me. But I feel connected. I feel like I've known Michelle for quite a few years, and so I'm really with a lot of gratitude that you're here and chatting with us today. And ultimately, Michelle, we'd love to, for those, you show up very specific within GRC, and a lot of people know you as the governance lady, right? And that's what
Yeah.
you do a little bit in Circle Forward. However, there's a lot more breadth to that, and there's a lot more that sort of encompasses who you are, and even your past that sort of like got us up to here. So, would you mind just sort of spending like the next 10 minutes or so and just sharing a little bit about yourself and your journey and some of the things that you're working on?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sage. And we are going to get together. We're going to do it. Spring's coming. And we're just down the road from each other. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, which is in the Blue Ridge Mountains of the United States. It's a part of the Appalachian Mountains. And this is the Southern Appalachians. And I get very specific because I'm very much of this place. I'm very connected to place. I consider myself a world citizen, but at the same time, like this is where I love, where I feel at home. This is home, and so I was pretty much born and raised here, and have traveled a little bit, but this is where I make my stand. That's what I always say. And I came to collaborative governance, as Sage said, in this space, in the GRC. The space I hold is really for collaborative, consent-based governance for a regenerative future. I'm convinced that it doesn't matter how regenerative our farming is, how regenerative our energy is, how regenerative our water systems are. None of that happens without, it doesn't matter how much our regenerative economics is. None of that happens if we're not practicing the principles of regenerative governance. And what are those? And we really explore those here. So I want to just tell a little bit about how I got into regenerative governance. My first part of my career was in the nonprofit sector. I was a fundraiser for the most part. I was also did programs. I worked in first the sexual assault, domestic violence field. I was at the shelter. I was carrying the beeper to go to the hospital. I was advocating, helping women advocate for orders of protection, and then I was doing education programs, in particular reducing sexual violence. And how do we reduce sexual violence? What do we do? And this was 30 years ago. So I was doing that. I moved out of that and I worked in public radio. I was a fundraiser. I was a fundraiser for the public radio station here that I still love, WNCW 88.7. Check it out online. It's a great station, award-winning station. And then I worked in the environmental movement. I was a fundraiser for an organization called Dogwood Alliance. One of the reasons I went into nonprofit instead of corporate is because I thought, I mean, my heart was there. I wanted to work in my passions and things I cared about. But I also had this idea that corporate was toxic and nonprofit wouldn't be. But that did not turn out to be true. Nonprofit organizations working to, create a change in the world, make something better, hold the line on something well, can be very toxic internally. Now, one of those organizations, Dogwood Alliance, was not toxic, but it was working in these toxic systems. So once and as I moved through that time, I also became interested in permaculture, and I became a student of permaculture, and I I got laid off from Dogwood Alliance in 2009. About the same time, a lot of other people got laid off, the housing, crash and all that. And I had some other things I was interested in, and I started really digging into permaculture. And then along came Occupy Wall Street. And I had been saying, because of the work in the environmental movement, this is systemic. This is bigger. This is economic. This has to do with bigger things than, one issue at a time. We don't have a bunch of problems. We have one problem. And that problem is corporate oligarchy, controlling everything. And so I began to think real deeply about that and business. And then I went to a training with John Buck, who is the OG sociocracy consultant, teacher, leader, thinker. He wrote the book, We the People, Consenting to a Deeper Democracy. He had a training here with a woman named Tracy Kunkler, and I got invited to that training, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like permaculture for organizations. And I went up to them afterwards and I was like, I don't know how, but I want in on this. I want to help expand this. I want to know about it. This is what we've been needed. And I became one of those sociocratic true believers. And Tracy and I ended up creating a business together, which we still have. It's called Circle Forward, circleforward.us if you want to go to the website. And we started offering trainings ourselves, learning, offering some of these things. And it was a lot of experimentation. And we started working in like sort of a more networked sort of this networks, food systems networks, food security networks, neighborhood networks. These kind of things were starting to emerge. And when we brought sociocracy to those networks, consent as a decision-making principle worked. The consent decision-making process that's specific to sociocracy sometimes worked, sometimes didn't work. Double linking did not take. It just didn't get traction. It was highly resisted as a solution. We have an analysis of why that is. And sometimes and some of the more engineering input,
Michelle,
transformation, output. And so
real quick,
that got us to here.
Just to interrupt you real quick. Can you explain some of the terminology you're sharing as you talk about this?
Sure.
Just for those who may not know some of that.
Yeah, I'll be glad to go back to that. So that expanded, just to finish up, that expanded into our works in a more networked way, which we also noticed was more of, we're starting to think about regenerative and how natural systems work and, how does all this work? So we were thinking about that, we're growing that, and that is why we work largely with networks now. We sort of found our niche with social impact networks and the organizations who are working in networks or want to work in a networked way. We now see that this is regenerative governance. This is the governance that furthers life. And it's not one thing, it's a bunch of things. So anyway, that's how I got there. Sociocracy. Consent is, most people who are familiar with consent are familiar with it from sociocracy. And in sociocracy, it's a process that happens in meetings. And there's like these 9 steps, and you do that process in the meetings. And it is great. It is vetted internationally as a very good process for meetings of about 12 to 15 people, no more. And if you're in a sociocratic business that's, adopting that, it's usually very sufficient, once you know and have practices for it, it's quite effective, and people start to like it, and people felt like facilitative leadership starts to grow in the organization. Great. Double linking is the way that sociocracy transforms a hierarchy into a culture in which no one's experience can be ignored, no one's objections can be ignored, no risks can't be ignored by people in higher positional power cannot ignore the risk of people in lower positional power. that the double linking does that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that.
No, that's
Y'all can
fine.
look it
That's
up.
fine. That was perfect.
And then
Just
there's this other part that's the sort of the engineering part of process, workflow process that you can look up too. It's all great stuff. It works great in certain settings and needs to be adjusted in others or adapted in other settings.
I said that because I didn't want to open up a whole can of worms because I know some of those topics can get very complicated very quick.
Yeah.
I did want to kind of like when we talk about the things that worked or didn't work, I think it's an awesome opportunity to explore why. And so when you give a little of the context around there and
Yeah.
it helps us understand that part, I think that's always invaluable to the audience. So thank you very much for humoring me for a minute.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to take it in that direction in a little bit, we can.
Yeah, absolutely. We can go anywhere we want to on this call. So,
Yeah.
all right, guys. I'm going to jump into the interview then. So let's talk about your origins and your personal journey. So what experiences or inflection points first drew you into governance work and regenerative organizing? You kind of hit on this a little bit. Can you go into more of that?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, but I'll tell you when I had that moment of experience with sociocracy, in particular with consent based decision making, and I'm going to say that this consent principle for decision making sticks with me as I think all the way back to that work with in the sexual assault, domestic violence field, and learning about what causes that and what are the dynamics there. I think power has been a topic for me for a long time, and how we do power with instead of power over, and not just like that's a great idea, but how do we do it? How do we organize ourselves, and what are the things we do and the practices and the skill sets? And I discovered it's a very deep transformation for a group and for a person, that happens, and that's systems change is going to do that. So that was one of the things. It was just like this interest in power and an analysis of power. And permaculture was huge for me. Permaculture was like another one of those, this is what we've been needing, something that's designed, this system of design where there are principles, and you can always, and no matter what the situation and no matter what level, you can take it back to principles, and those principles will still hold true. That was an inflection point. I appreciate design principles. They make me feel secure. I get a feeling they meet my need for stability and for something that you can hang on to and go back to. And then, as a lifelong environmentalist, as a person who was working in an organization that, attempted a strategy of like markets campaigns, like trying to push companies to change their, and this was 20 years ago. We first started, and Dogwood's still going and still been around. Like in the southern United States, you are not going to get any state legislature to write a law telling private property owners what they can do on their own land. It's not going to happen, right? It's just was not going to happen. So markets was the strategy, but now they've got a more complex strategy because it's just things are more complex. Where did I go with that? Where was I going with that? So anyway, sustainable goals, ESG, sustainable goals and stuff like that. Like I just, like a lot of folks were just like, that's not sufficient. We've got an actual world to save here that includes humans and non-humans. So that's what some of the touch points of that for me.
I love it. Love it. I personally, part of your journey is like we all tend to feel things first and then find systems or something to help complements that and gives that structure. And then we can say, oh, this is what I was feeling. And they just put better words to it. And I love how you grew into a variety of different ways to find that. And ultimately you had to create as well. And I can appreciate that. And the fact that you've been doing this for so long now too. It's just a testament to your drive. So thank you so much for your work. How
I
has your
couldn't
personal
not do it. I couldn't not do it. Once I found that permaculture, sociocracy, regenerative governance, I was like, I can't not do this. This is This is so
Then
interesting.
I'm going to love on you for a different way. I love on you for your hard-headedness, just to not give up over all the adversity. Because I'm sure there's a lot of struggles. You're like, why the hell am I doing this, right? And I'm sure we all ask ourselves those questions. So the fact that you do still keep showing up, good on you. Good on you.
Thank you. Persistence. Yeah.
I love it. How has your personal path shaped the way you approach shared leadership and group processes today, or group process today?
How has my personal path shaped the way I approach shared leadership? I like things that work. I like what works. I I um, I see, if you're, I think if you've been in, if I've been in our culture for any length of time, you can see what doesn't work, and I'm not. I don't think I'm gaslightable. I'll have to go a little bit personal about why I think that is. I grew up in a fundamentalist evangelical, speaking in tongues, charismatic, small Christian church. I was not abused in that church. It was actually a very loving community for the most part. People have had trauma in those situations. I did not, from actual people. But the story itself is a traumatizing, fearful story that eventually almost everybody questions as not making sense. And you hear a lot about deconstruction now. There's a lot of people, particularly younger people than me, who are going through a deconstruction process in that faith tradition. And I did that at 14 with nobody knowing anything about, and it's very painful. It's very psychologically terrifying and painful, but it did not make sense to me. And I think a lot of folks that longing to belong, that longing for security, that longing for belonging is huge. It's just a huge human need. But I think because I hadn't had some other, there was just, anyway, I'm not going to get too deep into my own, because I can get to my own practice. But I think that's what made me not gaslightable. Like, if things don't make sense to me and they're not adding up, um, I'm not going to go along with it. And you're not going to get me to be convinced that profit, there's just things that don't make sense, and I'm not going to go along with them. So that's one thing.
I love it. I love it. I think our ability to exercise and question the things around us and question the status quo is massive.
And
So,
just a love of nature, like a
absolutely.
love of this earth and this place and things, um, and
Well,
protecting the sacredness
there
of.
has to be a certain willingness, though, to zoom out and look at the container in which you're living in or whatever that you're a part of and say, hey, is this right or wrong? And a lot of people, that the courage in order to even do that could be overwhelming for a lot. The fact that you did it at 14, before a lot of the other ones out there is pretty massive. Luke, real quick, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to ask if you could give your thoughts on one of those principles in our like economy and politics that maybe not be agreeable. Like for instance, royalties, the residual income of royalties, how it creates such great wealth gap. There should be a limit to how much. And then it goes back to like the commons or the public, in my opinion. What do you think about that, Michelle? Is that a
I
good
think
example?
I think I don't know that much about the system of royalties. I will say this. For me, again, I take that back to sort of a bigger picture of capitalism. And I'm not even necessarily anti capitalist. I just think that it's the difference between a polyculture and a monoculture. If profit is the only motive and cash is the only currency and these things are the only one, then you've got a monoculture, and that's fragile. And it's also not good for the rest, where every other being that's in that system. So, to the degree that royalties are set up without the consent of people who are impacted by that system and that policy, and are not, taking and isn't getting any feedback for how that's working for those folks, then that makes that unregenerative. It makes it simply not regenerative. So that means it's not going to support life. And so capitalism, folks, as Adam Smith sort of thought of it, it's small and there's still a commons and there's regulation and all those sort of things, right alongside in the same community as a gift economy, as a barter economy, as all that would probably I would be willing to experiment with that and see how that worked. My hypothesis is that would allow for the innovative impulse that capitalism allows for, and of course in a context of basic needs already met, and certain things aren't subject to the profit motive, but these kind of things are, that kind of stuff.
I'd even say there's a theme there in what you went into, what you talked about in governance as well. And when we have reductionist thinking systems that value just one thing over the context of how you got there, I think you're going to have a world of mixed paths, mixed journeys that can be very extractive. So I agree with all of that. Just to highlight, we have an almost indecent man who just joined us. David, you look quite naked. I don't know. I think you should put like a censorship thing right here and screen yourself out.
He's talking about you've shaved. You look fine. You look good.
No, you look great,
handsome.
shaved. You look great. Okay, let me jump into the rest of this. So consent-based decision making is a major theme in your work. Why is it so central for you?
For me personally, or to the work? I think it goes back to those early days of domestic violence and sexual assault, and of working in that world and understanding consent at a deep level, and understanding, how that's ignored, and how we're trained to ignore our consent, especially girls, but anybody. Like, we're trained to ignore our objections. We're trained to have those voted out, or have those, ignore, you tell the child. This happened the other day. Mom with her little daughter, and we were at the Super Bowl party, and I'm saying hi, trying to get some attention from the girl, and she's little, and she didn't want to, and she was turning into her mom, and her mom was like, "Oh, can you say hi?" I was like, don't make her say hey to me. She doesn't want to. She does not want to say hey to me, and she does not have to, and don't make her. And the mom, is of another generation. She was like, "Oh, I know, I hear that all the time." And she was interested in how deeply enculturated she was to make sure her children were polite, right? And I'm like, she's not old enough to be polite, first of all. Anyway, so we're enculturated to ignore our consent. And then to really deeply understand what we mean by consent, that it's not compliance, and it's not coercion, and it's not compromise even, that it's something very held in the body, and very experiential, but also very easy to articulate, like, what is the risk I'm sensing? So I think that's why it's important to me personally, and it grounds my work. And then I just think in governance is all about decisions. Everything's a decision in governance. So it's a decision about what we're going to do, who's going to do it, how well did it go. All of that is decisions. And so consent is the principle that recognizes interconnectedness, that allows us to act as if we're interconnected, which is a regenerative principle itself.
What do you feel people often misinterpret about consent-based decision-making, and what does it actually mean in practice?
Undine, can you wait, or do you want to ask a question first?
That was my question. What does it look like in practice? So thank you, Sage.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you guys don't mind, if you can put the questions in chat, I will happily weave those in. Sometimes raising the hands and all that kind of stuff just distracts a little bit.
Yeah,
so
great.
Go ahead,
and
Michelle,
then I don't
please.
have to. Say it again. What do people get? What do people
What
misinterpret
what do
about
people
consent?
misinterpret about consent-based decision making, and what does it actually mean in practice?
The first thing that I usually hear is they confuse it with consensus, and they had a bad experience with consensus, and so they think consent doesn't work. So I'm going to say right now,
In the shortest way possible, define consent and consensus, please.
I'm going to say that consent is Tom Atlee said this, I'm going to say that consent is a breakthrough version of consensus. It allows us to meet the values of consensus. And many times when people are practicing consensus, they actually are practicing consent. But the difference is more informed.
If you don't mind, define it, not the difference. Yeah.
Go to circle4.us and read a whole web page about it. So that's one thing. What was the other question? Part of that question.
What do people often misinterpret? So that was the first one. And what does it actually mean in practice? So
Right.
if you can,
Yeah.
it's the same thing as where I was going with
Okay.
that. If you can define at a very, very simple level, what does consent-based mean and what does consensus-based mean?
Consensus doesn't have a great definition, but it is thought of as a process or a state you can sort of reach together, maybe, where everybody's in agreement. And usually consensus includes this thing of standing aside. So you're saying, I'm just not going to participate in that. It can also start to get perfectionistic, like it's like asking permission from the group. Consent is very simple in principle. It is a state of no significant objection. There's no risk we can't afford to take. It's good enough to try. So there's built within consent this assumption that this is an experiment and we're going to come back and we're going to evaluate it. And this assumption that anybody who's impacted can raise the red flag and say, hey, something's happened that we didn't foresee. There's been an impact that we didn't foresee. We need to reassess, and then that will happen. So now I'm not saying that's not available ever in consensus. I'm saying most people don't experience that. Most people don't know how to facilitate it. Most people don't know how to facilitate consent either. But that's
Hold on, Rio. Hold on. We're just going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here.
Yeah, I don't want to hold me back.
No. Just what it actually means in practice, though, too, is if I understand what we're saying, in a consent-based world in practice, it means that Undine could not agree with what I say and say, hey, I think Sage is dumb. I think it's going to fail miserably, but I don't actually have a big, huge objection.
No.
Like a normal objection. Okay, so explain that a little bit more in practice, please.
Let me do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Consent happens within a context. And that context is the context of shared purpose. And in that context, that's one.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have shared purpose? And number two is the risk is in a context of it's a risk to our shared purpose, or it's a risk to my ability to participate in this group in my role, to be in my role. Like it's my role, I can't fulfill my role that presumably has also been consented to, but maybe not, and whatever. Those are the two. That's the guardrails. That's your guardrails. So shared purpose and the ability to participate in the role.
Thank you.
So those are where the objections are. So, and then the objections are, you're first probably going to feel them in your body before you can articulate them. But people do need to be able to understand. You can't just say, it's just a feeling. You got to be able to say, I'm sensing that this might be a risk to our purpose. I need a minute to work it out, but hang on. And then everybody's like, okay, we're going to trust that you know something. You've got something from your perspective that the rest of us don't see.
I love it. I love it. All right. Thank you very much. That was perfect.
Yes.
Um, how does Circle Forward develop a focus on networks rather than single organizations? How did
We
Circle
couldn't
Forward?
get anybody to hire us. It was hard to get hired in single organizations because the people, particularly nonprofits, but also businesses, and because the people who were in the most pain were not the decision makers about about whether or not they were going to develop organizationally or transform their culture. The board members of of a nonprofit organization are not in pain unless they're suddenly tasked with, having to hire the ED who just walked out or something like that. But even then, they're they can leave. They're volunteers usually, and the boss, is afraid that because we're still in a mindset of voting and being able to overpower with voting and overwhelm with voting. So for the boss to really gather inside them that, oh yeah, nothing moves forward without my consent too. My perspective matters. It just means I'm going to actually have a better view of what's going on and build more trust and have more real buy-in. So that's why. And so then, and at the time, the things that were emerging were this, particularly food systems, like the local foods and the food system and food security was just really starting to emerge as an important place for not only land care, community care, equity, all those things. And so that's sort of where we found ourselves. And then it was like, oh, this is how we adjust. This is how this works.
Undine and Dennis, I have your questions. I'll weave those in just a second. For those unfamiliar, what does Circle Forward actually do when it partners with a network or a community?
We really accompany in some way so that we might facilitate. Often we'll start, with a network. There'll be a gathering, they're forming. We might facilitate something, introduce consent. We would work with usually the network coordinator, sort of the central team that's trying to work out these structures and help them design how they're going to do the things they do. If you look at Circle Forward, there's a network governance design canvas, and that's sort of, we use that to help orient folks to the things they're needing to decide about, and then they decide what's next, where's our next pain, what's leaking. Also, I particularly, and sometimes my colleague Dee, we offer training for groups, for teams in consent-based decision making. Which I'm like, give me 6 meetings and we'll have you up and running. That's what I believe we can do. And because adults need to learn in real time. So you can read about it, but in times of stress and uncertainty, we're going to fall back on the training we have. And so we're going to fall back. And then you get these situations where people weren't able to invest in the training that would have helped them more, and then they say consent didn't work.
I think it makes a lot of sense because your training is practice. In practice, I mean, it's that inception of doing the thing while you're teaching it as well. So I love that. How do you, when you're in networks or in a community, how do you work to provide a voice for nature or for, those generations yet to come?
This is the question of the moment, isn't it? This is like some leading edge stuff. How do we include the voice of nature? I say this is something we should experiment with wildly. I am really appreciating someone who's in the GRC. Her name's Dominique Rez, I believe. And she's in Australia, and she has just taken the position in an organization. Her job, her role on that board is to be the voice of nature and to behave as, to bring in that. And so she's really learning and experimenting with that. There are indigenous practices that we know about of literally human beings being in the circle, often masked as a representative of nature, some representative, more than one, even sometimes in trance state, so that they're really able to get that, as to bring in that voice of the salmon, voice of the bear, voice of the whoever represents the different I get chills thinking about it. Like,
Lord,
imagine that, the voice of the river.
yeah.
Um,
What about
and then
future
sometimes it's
generations? Same person or different person? What do you do for there? We always say we want to be 7 generations. We want to make decisions for the next 7 generations. Is that a different persona?
you could do that. I don't know. Let's try it. Let's
So
try
things
it.
we still need to experiment, right? On
Let's
both of them.
try it. Let's
Love
try
it.
it. There are lots of experiments being done, and I'm down for all of them. And
Okay.
some of it, sometimes you can just really bring in what we know about the science and the data of how this something is going to impact nature and make that matter, like make that harm not be
Yeah.
okay, like be a reason to adapt our strategy.
When you're working with these networks and communities again, right? And you're teaching as well as trying to emulate and is trying to bring them up to speed on things. How do you deal with objections or non-consent when the decision has to be made by a certain time or by a certain scope? What do you do when the luxury of time or the luxury of group or collective intelligence isn't as solid, or doesn't give you that breath that you need?
This is always the fear that folks
Yeah.
have that this is going to be the thing. And I think that fear often comes from consensus processes that got nowhere, that dragged on and endless debate. I'm going to say this is what I would recommend. The first thing I do is name what's happening. Like, we do have this. We do. Now, some efficiencies come from delegating roles by consent. So that's one thing that really creates a lot of efficiency as a consent-based role delegation process. So then you give people, and then they're just the ones who make the decision. Everybody trusts that and feels fine about that. I believe the group has the wisdom. I believe they hold the wisdom. I name, like, there's an urgency of time to make some kind of decision that's going to run out. These are the things that are true. You want, the deciders to be able to see what the full picture is. Nobody's withholding information from each other in that kind of situation. And I think when we name, now I'm also a practitioner of nonviolent communication. Again, something that's a principled base, and I'm like, when we can really get clear and hear the needs that are alive in the group, solutions arise.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not something that's ever been, like, it may not be the solution that we thought it was going to be, but a step forward or something arises
Yeah.
when those conditions are met. And I am convinced the wisdom's in the group. I don't have the answer to that. Y'all
I love
have
it.
the answer to
Love it.
that.
So often we like to rely on our process or rely on something like, oh, we're going to just do this thing. And I think what you just hit on, Michelle, and what I heard you say, just mirroring back, is often we need to ensure we build conditions. We need to
Right.
attract, we need to have representation within those conditions, and then just kind of step back and just see as things unfold. Because if you have the right foundation, a lot of the stuff kind of works itself out. Is that what I'm
Just
hearing?
like in nature,
Yeah,
create the conditions for regeneration to happen.
I love
And
it.
and then you'll have a lot better luck observing, interacting, adjusting, and adapting, and responding
Yeah.
to the
And
moment.
I'd like to widen that for anyone in the regeneration space. I feel like you can't force regeneration, but you can make conditions that those systems and those things will build on itself. And that's kind of what we need to do as a lot of stewards, is help create better, favorable conditions, more systemic conditions that are thinking more on the lines of regenerative thinking. So I love that. From your vantage point on what you're talking about here, what dynamics or habits are currently holding the regenerative movement back?
Oh, well, that's a big
I
movement.
know there's a long list there, maybe.
That's a big movement. I don't know. I mean, I don't,
Okay.
I'm sure whatever I say will be insufficient. So let me, and I imagine this would be something I definitely want to crowdsource.
Well, let's just say
What's
what are the
holding the
top things
regenerative,
that
I'll
what are
tell
the
you what's
top
holding the
things that you
regenerative
feel?
movement back. Funding.
Okay.
Funding is
Yeah.
holding the regenerative movement back. And, the, you know, there's plenty of money to fix what we've got going on right now. And it is directed in a non regenerative, extractive death spiral way. And so that's the big picture. But like, let's get down to like folks with money and funders and investors
Mhm.
who really do care and want to help create regenerative culture. Um, you know, I hate to act like I know because I don't. You know, like I know everything, and because I
That's
really
fine. Just
don't.
in this moment in
But
time, what's
but I would
pulling at
just
you?
say, you know, not doing regenerative practices within their own, you know, and in the relationships with the investor and the projects they're investing in, having assumptions about what success should look like without like that. Even those measures of success should be consented on and co-created with the whole system, and realistic timelines of what it takes to, you know, with a network in particular, impact is 3 to 5 years just to start seeing impact, because the first things you're doing is building the governance structure, building the trust, building the relationships, hearing the feedback, getting your ground, coming up with that shared purpose. That takes a while, you know, just getting that shared purpose. And they're, you know,
Do you think it could be done faster?
I don't know, could it be done faster? Maybe if the people who are in the system were resourced to put the time in, weren't having to do it off the side of their desk or do it as a volunteer, or, you know, maybe that. I mean, I think throw money at the regenerative movement is a great experiment. I'd love to see what would happen if just money got thrown at regenerative projects, including my own, including
Yeah.
governance. And, you know, like I was going to say before, you can't have a regenerative economics without regenerative governance. Maybe I did say that. You got to have policy, right?
And you're not mentioning this, but like even when you talk about consent based and you're like, okay, we're going to prototype this. So much of what we do is iterative. And everything what we do, we have to make sure we come back to the table is okay, is what doing today is still working. All right, let's come back around again. And when you don't have those opportunities for that, you start losing voices and you start losing mission, you start losing energy as well. So
Yeah.
I,
Another word for iterative is
please,
adaptive, is, you know, positive is like spiraling upward, you know, to in systems talk.
I love it. What practices or mindsets do you wish more groups would adopt as they attempt to work regeneratively?
What practice? Well, of course, consent based decision making with training, with actual some training, because people underestimate what a transformative change it is, and they underestimate how it's going to change, how their inner responses are going to be seen. How do I object? How do I respond to other people's objections? How do I respond when I have an objection? So that's some inner work. So I think there's a lot of other stuff around that in terms of at every level. So one is consent based decision making, as they're, you know, how are they including the whole system, and how are they hearing about risks and responding to those risks? I how they're choosing roles is a practice that I think the regenerative movement, and then how are they evaluating? How are we evaluating? What are those shared measures? These are all some things a lot of folks are doing, and a lot of folks are talking about. Um, yeah, those are just some things, you know.
Love that. Thank you. Um, what are your goals? Let's just look forward here. We're about our last 10 minutes, guys. So if you got any other final questions or anything, we got two questions left, which is actually wrapping up perfect. what are your goals and areas that you personally and Circle Forward are focusing on for 2026?
World domination. No.
Love it.
No, I'll tell you what
Where
I'll
can
tell
we
you what
sign
I'm
up?
focusing on. Something I'm focused on, Hurricane Helene happened here in my bioregion. I was already really wanting to bring more of this stuff back home. And as we recover from, and we're still recovering from this impact of this. I want to, and so I'm a big fan of open space technology as a one and a great process for self governance, for self organizing. I mean, so that's one of the goals. Is I would love to see open space unconferences open. I would like to see open space be just a cultural way all the time that people are self organizing, and then using the principles of regenerative governance to then develop the structures for doing those, deploying those projects together and coming back. That's a goal I have. I think that would be super exciting. And I have a goal of like really offering this. I think I've kind of come up with a package for consent-based decision making for teams that I'd love to see a bunch of different groups in Western North Carolina using it, and then using it when they collaborate. That's something I would love to experiment. I was an experiment I would love to do.
We need a beta test. I'll sign up. I have a group
Awesome.
here that I'd love to run through something like this.
Fantastic. So I would just love to see that, and then watching that web, that mesh, be that mycelium be really formed. And here's my final little mic drop. I believe that if we learned from a young age how to grow food, build shelter, and make decisions together in groups, that we would be unenslavable.
Hmm.
Even if we were physically enslaved, like even if we were physically locked up, our minds could not be enslaved. And it wouldn't matter if we went all through high school and college. Like we could, at almost any point, if we had those skill sets as a culture, we would be unenslavable.
I love it. I love it.
And
Um,
that's my goal,
that's
for
awesome.
all of us to be
Well,
unenslavable
You gotta have one of
and
those
ungaslightable.
crowd
guys, like,
cheering back soundtracks, Sage, where it's
yeah,
rah!
we do. I totally. I need to get my Steam Deck plugged in so I can start doing
Yeah.
sound effects. I
Although I would challenge it, Michelle.
will make that one of my
I try to
2026
Wait,
reframe.
wait,
goals.
wait, Sage. David's got a challenge. Go ahead.
Oh, I would just try to reframe it without an un.
Right.
Don't put in a not. What is it if you don't if it's
Free, baby.
not something?
Free.
There you go. Okay.
I want us to be free
Freedom.
and free your mind, and your ass will follow. That's what George Clinton said.
I love it.
But actually, he said, I think free your ass and your mind will follow. So there's that too. Either way.
Most people need to free their ass first. We don't realize we have our head up our ass, but that's okay. That's just my part of it. That's.
Dance is revolution, right?
Listen, before you go, everybody, please go to
I'm
Circle
not going
Forward.
yet, guys.
Okay.
Go ahead, please. No, you end it,
Circle4.us,
please.
and there's 2 free downloads, and there's more than one. But one of them is a new ebook that we just wrote about. It's called Nothing About Us Without Us, and it is a protocol for decision making by consent. And so this was developed with networks to take consent out of just meetings, which is where it sort of started with sociocracy, and be able to apply it in more of a networked way. So there's some if you're a sociocracy person, it'll look familiar, but there's some more stuff in there that I think is valuable at this
All right, I gotta
moment.
bring this back. Hold on. Okay, so I still got one more question on here. When you think about the facilitator and wants to close the meeting, it's like, okay, yeah, I have a facilitator on. Of course he is. When you think about long-term contribution, what do you hope your work enables or makes possible? What is your biggest goal that you're trying to not force, but trying to create and attract?
More specifically than regenerative culture. I mean,
your own
Yeah.
personal things. Come
I
on,
I I
and
would I would just love, I mean, really, I'm so local centric in
yeah.
so many ways, but I would just love to see my beautiful bioregion, the Southern Appalachians, be collectively self-organized, self-governed. That doesn't mean there's no place for government as institutions or institutions, but it's just the structure's different. And I would love to see that for my region, and that and every other region too. But when I think about like my vision, I just think about my mountains and the people of my mountains and all the different people
Well,
who are here,
let me ask
and the
you, like
land
Asheville.
itself,
Sorry, go ahead. The last part.
and the land itself, having
So,
that voice and being a regenerative culture.
so Asheville is the East Coast version of, I guess, California in a lot of ways, with a sort of micro bioregion of more regenerative thinking in that area.
Maybe
Let me just
maybe the
ask you,
East
like, if
Coast
you're,
version of Portland
I was
Yeah.
going to say, okay, that's fine.
or
If
Eugene.
you had to grade Asheville on their ability to work collectively and more regeneratively, like, do you feel that they're leveraging each other very well as a group?
That who is
Your
Asheville?
bioregion.
I think there's a lot of longing, and there's a lot of people who kind of have skill sets, and there's, I would say, the institutions are not as leading, forward thinking. They're trying, but I think there's a lot of stuckness in a sustainability mindset. But but
A
there's so
lot of
many.
egos, a lot of platform and solution
Well,
over collaboration. Is that what you're saying?
there's a lot of status quo protecting. That's what
Okay,
I'm
so
going to say.
technocrat type solutions versus regenerative solutions.
And just status quo of current political systems, you know,
Okay.
trying to stay safe within the current political system, which I'm just like, shit, y'all. Why? Why? But
No, that's an honest answer.
but
Those
you
are a
know
couple.
what? That's part of it. Like all perspectives, people's need, like what is the need they're protecting? What is the thing? Those are valid, tender needs. So being able to hear that and find those ways forward.
So, Nikki, come on off, and then we'll wrap up after this.
Awesome. I just wanted to share two things inspired by this conversation. Number one, Michelle, I completely agree with you. And one of the things myself and others have been talking about is that we are bringing degenerative psychologies into regenerative processes. And that's part of the reason there's all this like ego and pushback and a lack of forward movement that we actually need to be bringing at this time. So I've like been telling any clients that work with me, get psychotherapy, get psychotherapy, get psychotherapy, and they are. It's wild how much they change. The last thing I just wanted to say, as someone that was living with the Maya people in the Yucatan, the nature on the board, like, that thing that came up, they actually tattoo their people head to toe as the animal they see them as. So as they come into adulthood and they know they're done growing, so it's not going to warp the tattoos, they tattoo them completely. And the
Uh,
ones who represent the jaguar, who is the highest, like, symbol of nature for them, is so intense. But then you also you're not just seeing the projection of this person's power, you're seeing their alignment with it to the extent that when the jaguars go for the ayahuasca vine during the full moon, most people don't know this. Jaguars take ayahuasca and act like kittens in the jungle. The jaguar in the tribe, the human jaguar, goes and lays with them and plays with them and snuggles with them and kisses them and gives them food and stuff like that. And that's one of the ways they were able to get the relationship with the jaguars they have, so that by the time I was in that village in the middle of the jungle, 10 feet away from the jaguars, then it would just be like, oh, hey, human, and just walk by because it was on its
I
hunting time. But
grieve that I do not live in that I was not raised in a culture that gives me that much connection with
right,
the natural world
right.
around me. I grieve
Yeah,
that. I don't know that I want to be
yeah.
head to toe tattooed, but there's so many benefits.
It
So you
gives
might be willing.
such new meaning to FAFO. It really, really does. In such
Yeah.
a Darwinian kind of way too.
Yeah.
So I really love this.
And lastly, I'll just say the jaguar person and the jaguar are the ones that let them know when it's time to take the largest crocodile out of the
Yeah.
lagoon or the river that runs through their area to avoid the crocodiles coming out to eat children and cats
Oh,
and
wow.
stuff like that in the village.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Amazing
yeah.
stories. You've had an amazing experience, Nikki.
Mhm.
I see a
I've
quick
had a
circle
lot
of
of
have
fun.
people reached consensus on a name for your bioregion yet? It's not even been brought to proposal. There's never been a proposal about what is our bioregion called.
In that case, Michelle, I'm going to follow up with an image that I created that might help that. It's
I mean, we used to call it the Gadua bioregion, which is the
oh,
name
good.
The Cherokee name, the Gadua, was the
Okay.
name of the Cherokee.
I live in Cascadia in
Yeah.
Portland, Oregon, so we're just encouraging other bioregions to start getting a little bit more clarity
Yeah.
about their.
Originally, like years
Oh,
ago, there was
okay.
even the Gadua Journal. There was a whole Gadua movement. So
Wow,
I'd love to. That was like 20 years ago. I'd love to
I
revive that.
appreciate that. Based
Yeah,
on indigenous,
yeah.
traditions
It's
and
the
stuff.
Cherokee
Thank
word.
you.
Um,
Wow.
Save that chat, okay,
Okay.
Sage? What
Absolutely.
happened to
That
my?
just illusion. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So we're gonna wrap up here. As always, we'll stay open for a few minutes if there's any final questions. So don't run away just yet. I did
Okay.
want to say next week, Savari is here. We're gonna be interviewing her next week and
Oh,
talk
cool.
more about her own bioregion, about what she's doing to help build matriarchy type circles in her region and really make an impact in a very, very special way. So I'm so excited to have her on so she can tell her story and about what is lighting her up and where she's feeling compelled right now. So next week is going to be a great interview. And then the following week, I'm trying to get Dave Hodgins on here as well. So those of you who, the Mr. GRC himself, get him in here for an interview. I do have a follow-up with him, so that's not in stone yet. So if this is my final plug, if you know anyone who wants to get interviewed, or if you have something new and you've been interviewed in the past, or like, I could just get more people on this, right? Just need to refresh and talk about some new things that are going on. We'd love to have you back. We'd love to talk about things.
I
And
almost feel like everybody in this who was on this screen could be a great.
yeah, yeah, even Mr. Shooting Star himself, which I haven't had on here yet. So we've been talking about it a little bit here and there. But so yes, there's a lot of opportunity. Luke, thank you. Anyway, so let's chat and let's talk. The more we share, the more we communicate. I think we all are growing together. So I appreciate you all. So go ahead. The floor is open. We're done with the interview. Thank you so much, Michelle. The floor is all of yours, please.
I think everybody's
That's it. Yeah, that was
full.
good.
I think
That's
everybody's
amazing.
I have to jump, but thank you so much,
It
Michelle.
was
That was wonderful.
lovely meeting you, Undine. Great to meet you, Luke.
Mhm.
I've heard your name a lot, so I do
Mhm.
want to connect. Good to see you, Frederick. So good to see you, and Savory,
Mhm.
and David and Dennis.
Hey Michelle, I stuck a link in the chat for a project my sister's working on in
Okay.
Colorado, but it seems like something that would resonate with you. So,
Rave Circle?
using restorative justice in for family violence kind of
Restorative
situations.
approaches to intimate violence. Oh,
Oh
this would
my
be
gosh, I
right
love
up here.
restorative justice. Again, another regenerative process towards
Mm.
It is, right?
um,
But they don't use the restorative words the same way. I mean, the regenerative words the same way we do, but
yeah.
we're talking the same
And
stuff.
that's a example of that pro-social principles that I keep going back to, of graduated feedback or response to different to either it's not compliance, but either like fulfilling, the agreed upon norms or not. I didn't say that well. don't don't quote me. I don't have those down well. I
just
gotta
realized-
go.
Whole hour of great responses. You're okay.
Yeah, I learned a lot.